If you're new here, welcome. If you enjoy slow, realistic, psychological horror stories that feel like they could actually happen, consider subscribing. I proposed to Mara on a Tuesday in the parking lot of a Greek restaurant because I've been carrying the ring for 3 weeks and couldn't stand the weight of it anymore. She said yes before I finished asking, which was good because I'd rehearsed nothing beyond the first 4 words. We stood there between a dumpster and a Honda Civic, and she held my face with both hands and told me I was the best decision she'd ever made. That was October. By December, she told me it was time I met her family. I should explain something about Mara. In the 14 months we'd been together, she had told me almost nothing about where she came from. I knew her parents were alive. I knew she had a younger brother named Danny. I knew the village was in the mountains and somewhere in the northeast of the country, and that she'd left it when she was 17 to study in the capital and had never gone back for more than a few days at a time. When I asked why, she'd shrug and say that she loved her family, but that the village made her feel like she was wearing a coat that no longer fit. I understood that. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania that I visit once a year, and each time the houses look smaller and the people look more tired, and I feel guilty for noticing. So when she said it was time, I agreed immediately. I told her I was excited, which was true. I told her I wasn't nervous, which was not. We flew into Bucharest on a Wednesday and rented a small car, a white Dacia that smelled like artificial pine. Mara drove. The highway north was better than I expected, wide and European. But after 3 hours, we turned off onto a regional road that narrowed steadily, the asphalt cracking and patching until it became a single-lane corridor through dense forest. The trees were bare. December had stripped them to their bones, and they pressed against both sides of the road, like the walls of a hallway. Mara drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my knee. She was quiet, not tense, exactly, but focused in a way I associated with her preparing for something difficult, like the morning before her thesis defense when she'd sat at the kitchen table and eaten an entire grapefruit with a knife, slowly and methodically, without speaking. I watched the GPS. The blue line of our route threaded through smaller and smaller roads until it reached a dot with a name I still can't pronounce correctly. 6 letters. A sound in the middle that doesn't exist in English. Mara had stopped correcting me weeks ago. "There's something I need to talk to you about before we get there," she said. The trees had opened up slightly. Through the gaps, I could see the land rising gray and stony, with patches of snow on the higher ground. A creek ran parallel to the road, black water moving fast over flat rocks. "Hey, your dad's going to challenge me to a drinking contest," I said. "I've been training." She didn't laugh. "I'm serious, Aiden." I turned the radio down. It had been playing something Romanian and melancholy, a woman's voice over an accordion, and in the sudden quiet, the engine noise and the road noise seemed very loud. "There are things about the village that I need to explain to you, not history, rules." "Rules," I repeated. "Things you need to do or not do while we're there." I waited. She was choosing her words carefully, which Mara almost never did. She She was the most linguistically fearless person I'd ever met. Someone who'd learned English in 2 years and spoke it better than most Americans, with a vocabulary that routinely embarrassed me. But now, she was hesitating. "The first thing," she said, "between midnight and 3 in the morning, you stay inside. I don't care if you can't sleep. I don't care if there's a fire, and you stay inside with the door closed." "Okay. I'm not being dramatic. I know, I'm listening." "The second thing, when you're inside the house, if someone knocks after dark, you don't answer it, even if it sounds like me, even if it sounds like my mother. You come find one of us, and we answer it." I looked at her. Her eyes were on the road. Her jaw was set in a way I recognized from arguments, the way she held herself when she decided something and would not be moved. "Third, there's an orchard behind the house, apple trees, very old. You don't go into the orchard after sunset. During the day, it's fine. My brother will probably take you there. He's proud of it. But after sunset, you stay out. Why? Because I'm asking you to. Mara, there is a fourth thing." She took a breath. "My grandmother will want to meet you. She's very old, 91, and she doesn't leave her room. When you meet her, she's going to give you something. A small thing, like a token. You keep it on you, in your pocket, on a string around your neck, whatever. You don't put it down. You don't leave it in the room. You keep it on you until we leave." We arrived in the village at dusk. It was smaller than I'd imagined. The road simply widened into a kind of unpaved central area, with a church on one side and a few buildings that might have been shops, but were shuttered and dark. Houses spread out from there in loose clusters, most of them old stone with newer additions grafted on, satellite dishes bolted to chimneys, plastic chairs on porches. Smoke came from almost every chimney. The air smelled like wood fire and cold earth, and something faintly animal, hay or manure. The smell of a place where people and livestock still shared close quarters. Mara's parents' house was at the end of a dirt road that curved gently uphill from the village center. It was larger than most of the others. 2 stories of whitewashed stone, with a steep tiled roof and a wooden balcony on the upper floor. Behind it, I could see the orchard, even in the failing light. I could tell the trees were old. They had the look of things that had been growing for a century or more. Thick trunks, twisted into postures that seemed almost deliberate. Branches reaching in directions that didn't follow any logic of sunlight or space. They were leafless, of course. December, but even bare, they were dense. The orchard was a wall. Mara's father came out before we'd finished parking. He was a short, solid man with a mustache and hands that swallowed mine when we shook. His name was Vasile. He spoke no English, but he looked at me with an expression of such frank, unembarrassed evaluation that language felt unnecessary. He was taking my measure. I stood up straight and kept my grip firm and looked him in the eye. And after a moment, he nodded once and said something to Mara that made her roll her eyes. "He says you're taller than he expected," she translated. "He says tall men are often lazy. Tell him I'm the exception." She did. He laughed. It was a good laugh, deep and sudden, and I felt something in my chest unclench. Her mother, Elena, was waiting inside. She was tall like Mara, with the same dark eyes, and the same way of looking at you that made you feel both welcomed and examined. She spoke a little English, enough to tell me I was too thin, and that she would fix this. The kitchen was warm and enormous, dominated by a wood-burning stove that radiated heat like a living thing. There was food already on the table, more food than 4 people could eat. Sarmale, she told me, pointing, mamaliga, kozanak. She watched me eat with an intensity that I found both flattering and slightly alarming. Danny appeared during dinner. He was 19, lean and dark-haired, with the kind of restless energy that reminded me of myself at that age. He spoke decent English. Learned, he told me proudly, from video games and American television. "You play anything?" he asked, sitting down across from me and reaching for bread. "I used to, not much anymore." "That's because you're old." "I'm 29. "Old," he confirmed. I grinned. I liked him immediately. He had Mara's directness without her caution. And over the next hour, he told me more about the village than she had in 14 months. He told me about the school that had closed 3 years ago, and the families that had left, and the ones that stayed. He told me about the priest, Father Luca, who was 80 and nearly blind, but who still gave the sermon every Sunday and could quote scripture in 4 languages. He told me about the mountains and the hiking trails and the cave system to the north that nobody had fully mapped. He did not mention the orchard. He did not mention the rules. After dinner, Mara took me upstairs. Our room was at the end of a hallway, small and cold, until she lit the ceramic stove in the corner, a green-tiled masonry heater that took 20 minutes to warm, and then held its heat for hours. The bed was narrow. The walls were thick. Through the window I could see the orchard, or rather the absence of it, a darkness where the trees blocked the moonlight, a shape cut out of the sky. "Tomorrow you'll meet Bunica," Mara said. She was sitting on the bed, pulling off her boots. "My grandmother, she's looking forward to it. Should I bring something? A gift?" "No, just be respectful, and remember what I said. Whatever she gives you, keep it with you." "I will." She looked at me. In the dim light of the single bulb, her face was all planes and shadows, and she looked, for a moment, like someone much older. "I know this is strange for you. I know you don't believe in these things. I don't need you to believe. I just need you to respect it." "I do respect it." "You think it's folklore." "I think it matters to you. That's enough." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and turned off the light. We lay in the narrow bed and listened to the house settle around us, the wood contracting in the cold, the stove ticking as it heated, and very faintly, the sound of wind in the orchard. Not howling, not dramatic, just a steady, low sound, like breathing. I slept well that first night. Better than I expected. The bed was uncomfortable, and the pillow was essentially a flour sack stuffed with wool. But the room was warm and dark, and I was exhausted from traveling. I woke once, around 2 a.m, according to my phone, and heard something outside. Not the wind. Something more rhythmic. A tapping or a clicking, like someone walking on the stone path below the window. I lay still and listened, and after a minute it stopped. I went back to sleep. In the morning the village was beautiful. I say this without reservation. The light was cold and clear, and it turned everything sharp. The stone houses, the bare trees, the mountains rising behind them like a painting. Frost covered the ground and glittered in the sun. Roosters crowed. Somewhere a dog barked. I stood on the balcony with coffee that Elena had made, thick and sweet, and served in a cup the size of a thimble, and I thought, I understand why people stay in places like this. Danny took me on a tour. We walked to the village in an hour. He introduced me to people whose names I immediately forgot. Old men in flat caps who shook my hand and said things I couldn't understand. Women who looked at me with the same frank evaluation Vasile had and seemed to reach similar conclusions. Danny translated loosely. She says, welcome. He says you have honest eyes. She wants to know if you're baptized. Am I supposed to answer that? Just say yes, it's easier. We ended up at the orchard. In daylight, it was less imposing, but no less strange. The trees were planted in uneven rows that didn't follow the terrain in any logical way. Some were enormous, their trunks wider than I could reach around. Others were smaller, newer, but still twisted into the same contorted shapes. The ground beneath them was thick with fallen apples, brown and frozen, and the smell was sweet and rotten, the smell of fermentation. My great-great-grandfather planted the oldest ones, Danny said. He was walking ahead of me, hands in his pockets. Maybe his father, nobody's sure, they're a weird variety. The apples are small and sour, not good for eating. My mother makes brandy from them. Tuica. He looked back impressed. Mara taught you that? I've been studying. He laughed. The good stuff, yes. Not the tourist tuica they sell in Bucharest. Real stuff. Burns your throat and makes you see God. He paused at one of the largest trees and put his hand on the trunk. This one is the oldest. Maybe 200 years. It still produces fruit. Crazy, right? I looked up into the branches. They were gnarled and thick, splitting and rejoining in ways that created shapes almost like letters or like joints, elbows and knees and fingers. I felt a slight unease, the kind you feel standing at the edge of a high place. Not fear exactly, but an awareness of possibility. Mara told you the rules, Danny said. He wasn't looking at me, he was still facing the tree. She did. You think it's superstition? I didn't say that. He turned around. His face was different from how it had been all morning. The grin was gone. He looked for a moment like his father, like a man taking a measure. I don't know what it is, he said. Superstition, maybe. Maybe something else. I've lived here my whole life and I've never gone into the orchard after dark. Not once. Not because I'm afraid. Because I respect the agreement. The agreement? The village and the orchard have an understanding. We don't go there at night. In return, the orchard doesn't come to us. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. Come on, he said, and the grin returned as if someone had flipped a switch. My mother's making lunch, and if we're late, she'll kill us both. And that's a thing I actually believe in. That afternoon, I met Bunica. Ymira took me to her room, which was on the ground floor at the back of the house. The door was heavy wood, dark with age, and Mara knocked twice and waited. A voice answered from inside, thin and high, and Mara opened the door. The room was hot. A ceramic stove. larger than the one in our bedroom, filled one corner and radiated heat that hit me like a wall. The walls were covered in fabric, heavy woven tapestries in red and black and gold, and the windows were curtained with something thick that let in only a thin blade of light. In the center of the room, in a chair that seemed designed for someone twice her size, sat a woman so old that her age had become a kind of landscape. Her face was a map of creases. Her hands, folded in her lap, were like bundles of sticks wrapped in paper. Her eyes, though, in her eyes were clear and dark and absolutely present. Mara spoke to her in Romanian and I heard my name, and Bunica looked at me and said something back that made Mara smile. She says you have a kind face but a stubborn jaw, Mara translated. She's not wrong. Mara relayed this. Bunica laughed, a dry sound like leaves rustling, and beckoned me closer. I knelt beside her chair, which felt like the right thing to do, and she took my face in her hands, the way Mara had the night I proposed. Her skin was dry and warm, and she smelled like wood smoke and dried herbs and something else, something older, like the smell of a church that has been prayed in for 500 years. She spoke to me for several minutes. I understood nothing, but I listened, and her voice had a quality that was almost musical, Dutch rising and falling in patterns that felt less like speech and more like incantation. When she finished, she reached into the folds of her clothing and produced a small object, which she pressed into my palm and closed my fingers around. I looked at it. It was a piece of wood, dark and smooth, about the size of my thumb. It had been carved or perhaps worn into a shape that was almost but not quite a cross. The vertical bar was slightly curved, and the horizontal bar was offset, lower than center, so that the overall impression was less of a crucifix and more of a figure with outstretched arms. It was warm from her body. She said something else, looking directly into my eyes. Her grip on my hand was surprisingly strong. She says, "Keep it close," Mara translated. She says it's been in the family for a long time and it knows its purpose. She says as long as you carry it, you are under the protection of this house. "Thank you," I said to Bunica. "Mulțumesc." She smiled. She had 3 teeth. She patted my hand and released it and said one more thing quietly that Mara didn't translate. I asked later what it was. She said, "Don't test what you don't understand." I put the wooden figure in my pocket. It sat against my thigh like a small warm stone, and I was aware of it the way you're aware of a new ring on your finger, constantly, a gentle reminder that something has changed. The second day passed easily. I helped Vasily split firewood, which delighted him because I was apparently the first person Mara had brought home who knew how to use an axe. We ate. We drank tuika, which did indeed burn, and which did produce, after the 3rd glass, a sensation that I can only describe as a profound and temporary clarity. Elena showed me photographs. Mara as a child, gap-toothed and furious about something. Mara at her graduation. A photo of the village from decades ago that looked almost identical to how it looked now. That night, when I stood on the balcony before bed and looked at the orchard, the moon was half full and the light gave the trees a silvered quality, almost beautiful. The branches moved slightly in a wind I couldn't feel. I watched for a few minutes, feeling peaceful, feeling welcomed, feeling like this place and these people were becoming mine. Then I heard the tapping again, the same rhythm as the night before. Click, 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 click. Like someone walking or like branches hitting stone. Except there was no branch close enough to the house, and the rhythm was too regular, too deliberate. I leaned over the railing and looked down. The path below was empty. The sound continued for perhaps 30 seconds, and then stopped. Not fading, just stopping, and the way a person stops walking when they realize they're being watched. I went inside. I closed the door. I checked my pocket. The wooden figure was there. On the third day, Danny and I went hiking. The trail started behind the church and climbed steeply through pine forest, switchbacking up the ridge behind the village. The air was cold and sharp and tasted like resin. Danny moved fast for someone who smoked, and I struggled to keep up, which he found hilarious. At the top of the ridge, we could see the whole valley. The village was a cluster of roofs and smoke. The orchard was a dark rectangle behind Mara's house, larger from above than it seemed from the ground, stretching back toward the base of the next ridge. I could see the individual trees, their twisted shapes. I knew the way they grew denser toward the center. "It's bigger than I thought," I said. "Nobody's sure where it ends," Danny said. He was sitting on a rock, smoking. "The trees at the edges are young, maybe 50, 60 years old, but the further in you go, the older they get. Bunica says the center has trees that were old when the village was built." "When was the village built?" "Records say 17th century, and Bunica says older, much older." I sat beside him. The sun was low and the shadows were long. Below us I could see Elena hanging laundry. A dog trotted along the main road. Smoke rose straight up in the still air. "Danny, can I ask you something?" "You're going to ask about the orchard?" "I'm going to ask about the rules, all of them, the midnight curfew, the knocking, the orchard, the token." "Yeah, Mara told me what to do, but she didn't tell me why." "Not really." He was quiet for a long time. He finished his cigarette and stubbed it out carefully on the rock and put the butt in his pocket. "There's something in the orchard," he said. "I don't know what it is. Nobody does. The old people have names for it, but the names contradict each other. Some say it's a spirit. Some say it's a consequence. Father Luca says it's a punishment that predates the church. Bunica says it has always been there, that it was there before the trees, and the trees grew because of it, not the other way around." "A consequence of what?" "Of something that happened here a long time ago. Something that was done, a wrong thing. And the orchard is the wound, and the thing in the orchard is the infection." He shrugged. That's how my grandfather used to explain it. He was a practical man. He didn't like ghost stories. But he never went into the orchard at night, and he never opened the door after dark without checking first." "Checking for what?" "Checking that it was a person knocking. Because the thing in the orchard, whatever it is, can move. It stays in the orchard most of the time, most of the year. But in winter, when the nights are longest, it reaches further, like a shadow getting longer. And it's smart. It knows how doors work. It knows how names work. It will knock and call your name and sound like someone you trust because it wants to be invited in. Invited in for what? Danny looked at me, and for the second time I saw the grin disappear and the older face emerge. To take something from you, not your life, something else. Something you don't notice is gone until you try to use it and it isn't there anymore. Like what? Like whatever makes you yourself. We hiked back down in silence. The sun set while we were still on the trail, and by the time we reached the village, the street lights, the few that worked, were on, and the orchard behind the house was a solid black mass against the slightly less black sky. I didn't look at it. I didn't want to. That night, the tapping came again. I was lying in bed, Mara asleep beside me, and I heard it. Click, 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 click. But it was louder than before. Closer, not on the path below the window, but on the wall of the house itself, as if someone were tapping on the stone with a fingernail, working their way along the ground floor. I lay perfectly still. The sound moved. It traveled from the front of the house to the side, then around to the back, toward the orchard. It stopped. Started again. Stopped. Then, very distinctly, I heard a knock. 3 knocks. On the front door, firm and deliberate. I sat up. Mara stirred beside me. "Don't," she said. Her voice was clear and awake. She hadn't been sleeping. "Someone's at the door. Don't go to the door. Mara, it could be someone who needs help. It could be a neighbor. 2 a.m, nobody comes to this door." She sat up and put her hand on my arm. Her grip was strong. "Stay here. It will stop." 3 more knocks. Then a voice, a woman's voice, muffled by the thick door and the floor between us, but audible. It said something in Romanian. It sounded urgent. It sounded afraid. "That sounds like your mother," I said. "My mother is in her room. I can hear her snoring." And she was right. Through the wall, faintly, I could hear the low, regular sound of Elena sleeping. The knocking stopped. The voice stopped. The tapping resumed for a few seconds, receding, moving away from the house toward the back, toward the orchard. Then silence. Mara didn't release my arm for 10 minutes. When she finally did, there were marks on my skin. "Has it ever gotten in?" I asked. "Once. Before I was born, a cousin of my father's was staying here. He answered the door. Bonica found him in the kitchen the next morning, sitting at the table with his coat on, like he was about to go somewhere. He wasn't dead. He was breathing, but he was empty. Bonica said it was like someone had poured him out and left the container. What happened to him? He lived another 20 years. He could eat, he could walk, he could follow instructions if you gave them clearly enough, but he never made a decision on his own again. Never initiated a sentence, never laughed, never cried. He was there, but the person who had been inside was gone. I thought about the boy Mara had mentioned in the car, the one from the neighboring village who never spoke again. I thought about what Danny had said. Whatever makes you yourself. I put my hand in my pocket and touched the wooden figure. It was warm. The 4th day was when I made my decision. I want to be precise about this because I've spent every day since then going over it, and I need you to understand that it wasn't ignorance, it wasn't bravado, it wasn't a dare, it was a specific, deliberate choice made for a reason that seemed, at the time, sufficient. Danny and I were in the village center in the afternoon. He was buying tobacco from one of the small shops. I was standing outside looking at the church when an old man approached me. He was very old, stooped and thin, with a face like crumpled paper. He spoke to me in Romanian, rapidly and with evident distress, gripping my arm the way Mara had the night before. Danny came out and spoke to him. The old man gestured toward the orchard, toward the mountains, toward me. His voice rose. Other people were watching from doorways and windows. "What's he saying?" I asked. "He says he had a dream about you," Danny said. His face was neutral in a way that worried me. "He says he saw you in the orchard. He says you were carrying a light." "I haven't been in the orchard at night. I haven't been anywhere at night." "I know. He's old. He dreams a lot." But the old man wasn't finished. He gripped Danny's arm now and spoke more urgently, and I saw Danny's expression change. Not alarm exactly. Something more like recognition, like someone hearing a word they hadn't heard in a long time. "What?" I said. "What did he say?" "He says it's been calling to you since you arrived. He says it recognized you." "Recognized me from what?" Danny didn't answer, and he spoke to the old man in a tone that was gentle but firm, and the old man shook his head and shuffled away, looking back at me twice. "What did he mean, it recognized me?" "I don't know. Old people here say things. Don't worry about it." But I did worry about it. I worried about it all afternoon. I worried about it at dinner, where I smiled and ate and drank and performed normalcy, while my mind worked at the old man's words like a tongue at a sore tooth. "It recognized you? What does that mean? What could that mean?" The rational part of my brain, the part with a master's degree in structural engineering, the part that designs buildings and calculates load-bearing capacities, that part said, "It means nothing. An old man in a dying village had a dream about the stranger in town. Unremarkable, predictable even. But another part of my brain, a part I don't normally listen to, a part that operates below the level of language, in the territory of instinct and peripheral vision, and the feeling you get when someone is standing behind you. That part said, go look. Go to the orchard and look. Because if there's nothing there, then you'll know, and you can stop lying awake at night listening to tapping, and you can stop flinching every time you see the trees through the window. Go and look and prove that it's nothing, and then you can be at peace. This is what I told myself. I want to be honest about that. I told myself I was being brave. I told myself I was being rational. I told myself that confronting fear was how you defeated it, that avoidance was a form of cowardice, that a grown man should not be afraid of an apple orchard. I told myself all of these things, and every single one of them was a lie I used to cover the real reason, which was simpler and uglier. I wanted to know. I wanted to know the way you want to touch a flame. Not because you doubt it will burn, but because the wanting itself is the thing you can't resist. I waited until 1 a.m. Mara was asleep. The house was silent. I dressed in the dark, slowly, carefully. I put on my boots and my coat. I checked my pocket. The wooden figure was there. I considered for one moment leaving it behind. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would be a more honest test without it, a purer experiment. I left it on the nightstand. I told myself I'd be gone 5 minutes. I told myself it wouldn't matter. I went downstairs. The house was dark and warm, the stoves still radiating from the evening fires. The back door was in the kitchen. It was locked with a simple iron latch, old and heavy, the kind that required you to lift and slide. It made a sound when I opened it, a low metallic groan, and I stood still for 30 seconds, listening. Nobody stirred. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately. It was a different cold from the daytime cold, sharper, more personal, the kind that finds the gaps in your clothing and presses against your skin like fingers. The sky was clear and the moon was just past half, bright enough to see by, but not bright enough to remove the shadows. The path from the back door led straight to the orchard, 50 meters, maybe less. The trees were black shapes against the dark gray of the mountains, and they were perfectly still. No wind, no movement at all. I walked. My boots crunched on the frozen ground and the sound seemed obscenely loud in the silence. I could see my breath, or I could hear my own heartbeat. The back of the house receded behind me. The kitchen window a faint yellow rectangle where the stove light still glowed. Ahead, the orchard waited. I stopped. I stood among the outer trees, and I listened. Silence. Absolute, total silence. No wind, no insects, no distant dogs or settling houses or any of the 1,000 small sounds that make up the texture of a rural night. The silence was so complete that it had a quality of its own, a presence, as if silence were a thing that could accumulate and press against your ears. I took another step, then another. The trees closed around me. They were larger than they'd seem from outside, their trunks wider, their branches reaching further. The frozen apples on the ground were soft under my boots, and they released a smell that was sweet and wrong, like fruit that has fermented past the point of alcohol into something chemical. I was perhaps 20 meters into the orchard when I heard the first sound. It was a breath. Not mine. A slow, deliberate exhalation, the kind a person makes when they've been holding their breath for a long time and finally release it. It came from ahead of me and slightly to the left, from deeper among the trees. I stopped walking. My heart was hammering so hard that I could feel it in my teeth. I stood perfectly still and waited. Nothing. The silence reassembled itself. I almost laughed. Almost. I took one more step, and then the orchard moved. I don't mean the trees moved. I mean the space between them rearranged. The tree that had been directly ahead of me was now to my right. The gap I'd been walking toward had closed. The tree line behind me, which should have been visible as a lighter strip against the open ground, was gone. In every direction, in every line of sight, there were only trees. I turned around. I turned around again. The same view in every direction. Trees, darkness, the sweet rot smell of frozen apples. I reached for my pocket, for the wooden figure. My hand closed on nothing, empty fabric. And I remembered with a clarity that felt like falling that I had left it on the nightstand. The breath came again. Closer. Not from one direction now, but from several, as if the thing that was breathing was large enough to surround me, or as if there were more than one, stationed among the trees in a pattern that I was at the center of. I turned, and the trees were the same in every direction, identical, a repeating pattern of dark trunks and darker spaces. Yeah, and I understood with a certainty that dropped through my stomach like a stone that I was lost. 20 meters from the house, in an orchard I had walked through in daylight, and I was completely, hopelessly lost. "Hello?" I said. My voice didn't carry. It left my mouth and dropped to the ground like something solid, like the air was too thick to transmit it. The word fell at my feet and died. The breathing stopped. In its place came something else, a sound I struggled to describe because it didn't correspond to anything in my experience. It was like a voice, but not a voice, like a vibration in the air that carried the shape of language without the content, a meaning without words. And the meaning was, I see you. I ran. I chose a direction at random and I ran, crashing through the low branches, tripping over roots, the frozen apples bursting under my boots. I ran for what felt like minutes and hit nothing, reached nothing, found no edge, no boundary, no end to the trees. I stopped, gasping, my lungs burning with cold air, and I was in exactly the same place. The same trees, the same configuration, the same darkness in every direction. And then I heard my name, Aiden, clear and unmistakable. My name, spoken in a voice that was not Mara's and not Elena's and not anyone's. A voice that seemed to come from the wood of the trees themselves, from the ground, from the space between molecules of frozen air. A voice that knew my name the way a sculptor knows clay, as raw material, as something to be shaped. Aiden, you left the house. I pressed my back against the nearest trunk. The bark was warm. That was wrong. It was December and the tree should have been cold. But the bark was warm, almost hot, as if something inside the wood were generating heat, as if the tree were alive in a way that trees are not supposed to be alive. I want to go back, I said. My voice worked this time, but it sounded small, childish, absurd. You came here, you chose this. I want to go back. I'm sorry. I want to go back to the house. A pause. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of consideration, of evaluation. Something was thinking about what I'd said. Something was deciding. You left the token. I know, I'm sorry. You came without protection. You came by choice, into my place, in my hours. There was no anger in the voice. That was the worst part, There was no malice, no threat, no cruelty. There was a patience that was worse than any of those things. The patience of something that has been waiting for a very, very long time and is not in any hurry. What do you want? I said. You know what I want. The old ones told you. The boy told you. Your woman told you. Everyone told you, and you came anyway. A shape moved between the trees. Not a figure. It's not a silhouette, not anything I could describe as a body, a displacement, a place where the darkness was thicker than the darkness around it. It moved the way smoke moves, slowly and with a kind of fluid inevitability, and it was coming toward me. I'm going to walk out of here, I said. I pushed off from the tree and started walking. I picked a direction, any direction, and I walked. The ground was uneven, and the roots caught at my boots, and the branches scraped my face and hands. But I walked. Behind me, or beside me, or all around me, the displacement moved too. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. It was already everywhere. You think the edge is that way? The voice said. It was conversational now, almost gentle. It isn't. The edges are mine after dark. I decide where they are. I kept walking. My breath was ragged. My hands were bleeding from the branches. The cold was inside me now, not on my skin, but in my chest, in my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. I want one thing, the voice said. Oh, one small thing. And then you can go home. You can go back to your woman and your warm bed and your life. One thing freely given, that's how it works. That's how it has always worked. I stopped. What thing? A memory? A memory. One memory. Your choice. Give it to me and the edges open and you walk home. Refuse and you stay here until the sun comes up, and by then I will have taken much more than one. I stood in the dark orchard, and I bargained with something that had no face. I want you to understand the absurdity and the terror of that. I was a structural engineer from Pennsylvania, standing in a Romanian apple orchard at 2 a.m, negotiating with an entity that existed in the spaces between trees, and the negotiation was about my memories, about the contents of my mind, as if they were currency, as if they could be extracted and spent. Which memory? I said. Your choice, I told you. Something real, something that matters to you. I'll know if it doesn't. I thought about what to give it. I thought about childhood memories, trivial ones. A birthday party I barely remembered, a school trip, the name of a teacher. But I understood with the same instinct that had told me to come here that those wouldn't satisfy it. It wanted something with weight, something that I would miss. If I give you a memory, I said, do you promise I can leave? I don't promise. I don't lie. Those are human things. I tell you what will happen. You give, you leave. That is what will happen. I thought about Mara. I thought about the parking lot and the Greek restaurant and the ring I'd carried for 3 weeks. I thought about her hands on my face and her voice saying yes before I'd finished asking. And I almost gave it that. I almost opened my mouth and offered the most important memory I had because it was the most valuable and therefore the most likely to be accepted. But something stopped me. Something stubborn and angry and deeply, fundamentally mine. The same stubbornness that Bunica had seen in my jaw, or in the same quality that made me walk into this orchard in the first place, turned inside out, redirected. I would not give this thing the memory of proposing to Mara. I would not give it anything that mattered that much. My father's funeral, I said. The silence changed. The consideration again. I was 12. He died of a heart attack in September, and the funeral was on a Thursday. It rained. My mother wore a blue dress because she didn't own a black one. The priest mispronounced his name. I dropped my flower on the coffin, and it bounced off and fell in the dirt, and I didn't pick it up. Give me that one. I offered it, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered in a specific way. It was a wound I'd carried for 17 years. A sharp and permanent grief that had shaped me as surely as anything else. But it was also a memory I had visited too many times, worn smooth like a river stone, polished by repetition until it had become more artifact than experience. I offered it because I thought I could survive without it. I thought the scar would remain, even if the memory of the cut was gone. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. That will do, the voice said. and something happened that I cannot describe in language that makes sense. I felt a sensation in my head, not pain but absence, like a tooth being pulled under anesthesia. A tugging and then a gap, a space where something had been and now was not. My father's funeral. I could feel the shape of where it had been. I knew it had existed. But when I reached for it, or when I tried to see the rain or my mother's dress or the flower bouncing off the coffin, there was nothing. A blank, a hole in the fabric of my life where a specific Thursday in September had been. The trees moved, or the space between them shifted, or my orientation changed. But suddenly there was a gap ahead of me, a lighter space, and I could see the open ground and the back of the house and the yellow glow of the kitchen stove through the window. I walked toward it. I didn't run. My legs felt heavy and wrong, like I was wading through deep water. But I walked, and the trees let me, and I stepped out of the orchard and onto the frozen grass, and the air was thin and cold and real. I looked back. The orchard was just an orchard. Dark trees, still branches, frozen apples on the ground. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The silence was normal silence, the silence of a winter night in the mountains. I went inside. I latched the door. I went upstairs. Miss Mara was sitting up in bed with the light on. She was holding the wooden figure. "Where were you?" she said. Her voice was flat and careful, the way people speak when they are controlling a very large emotion. "I went outside." "You went to the orchard?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." "You left this." She held up the wooden figure. "You left it here and you went to the orchard?" "Yes." She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was assessing damage. "What happened?" I told her. All of it. The breathing, the displacement, the voice, the negotiation, the memory. When I finished, she closed her eyes and pressed the wooden figure against her forehead and whispered something in Romanian that sounded like a prayer. Your father's funeral," she said. "It's gone. I know it happened. I know the facts, but I can't see it anymore. I can't feel it. Do you understand what you've done? I gave it a memory, one memory, and it let me go. It doesn't work like that." Her voice cracked for the first time. "It never takes just one. The one you give it is the door. It uses that door to come back for more. Tonight, tomorrow, the next night. It will come back and take another and another, and it won't ask permission because you already gave permission when you walked in there. You opened a transaction and it will collect until it's satisfied or until there's nothing left." The room was very quiet. The stove ticked. The wooden figure sat in Mara's palm, small and dark and useless. "What do I do?" I said. "I don't know. I don't know." She was crying now. I told you the rules. I told you, and you went anyway." "I know. Why? Tell me why." I couldn't answer her because the honest answer was the worst answer. Because I wanted to. Because I chose to. Because no one forced me and no one tricked me, and I walked into the orchard with open eyes and an empty pocket, and I did it to myself. She went downstairs. I heard her knock on Bunika's door. I heard voices, low and urgent, Mara's, and then the thin, high voice of her grandmother. I sat on the bed and pressed my hands against my temples and tried to remember my father's funeral and found only blankness. a smooth wall where a door had been. Mara came back 20 minutes later. Her face was drawn and pale, and she moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone managing a crisis. Bunica says there might be a way. Not to get the memory back, that's gone. But to close the door. To stop it from taking more. How? You have to go back into the orchard. No. In daylight tomorrow before noon when it's weakest. You take the token, you go to the oldest tree, the one Danny showed you, and you give the token back to the tree. As you press it into the bark, and you say the words, Bunica will teach you, and you close the transaction. You tell it that the deal is done. One memory freely given and nothing more. And that works? Bunica says it has worked before, not often, not always, but it has worked. What happens if it doesn't work? Mara sat beside me on the bed. She took my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Then it keeps taking. One memory at a time. Your father's funeral first, then your father's face, then your father's name, then your mother, then your childhood, then me. It eats backward through your life until there's nothing left and you're like the boy in Cluj or Vasile's cousin at the kitchen table. A body with no one inside. I didn't sleep. I sat in the bed with the wooden figure in my hand, gripping it so tightly that its edges cut into my palm, and I waited for sunrise. Mara stayed awake with me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The warm weight of her beside me, the sound of her breathing, the knowledge that she was there and real and mine. At some point in the night around 4, I tried to remember my father's face. Not the funeral. Just his face. The way he looked in the morning over breakfast, reading the paper, coffee in his left hand, because he was left-handed. I could see the kitchen. I could see the paper. I could see the coffee cup. But where his face should have been, there was a smear, a blur, like a photograph that had been rubbed with a wet thumb. The features were gone. The specifics were gone. I knew he had brown eyes because my mother had told me he had brown eyes, but I could not see them. I could not conjure them. They were gone. It's already happening, I said. Mara's hand tightened on mine. It's taking more. His face, I can't remember his face. She pulled me close and held me, and I pressed my face against her neck and tried to feel something about this loss, tried to grieve it. But the grief was strange and thin because the thing I was grieving was the ability to grieve. Each memory it took reduced my capacity to understand what I had lost. It was a theft that erased the evidence of itself. Dawn came slowly. The sky went from black to gray to a pale, cold blue, and the mountains emerged from the darkness like something surfacing from deep water. I watched the orchard take shape in the growing light. It looked ordinary, harmless. An old apple orchard behind a farmhouse, bare branches against a winter sky. At 7, Mara took me to Bunica. The old woman was awake. She looked at me with those clear, dark eyes, and I saw something in them that I hadn't seen before. Fear? Not for herself? For me? She knew what I'd done. She knew what I'd given. She could see the gap in me, the missing piece, as clearly as if I'd walked in with a limb gone. She spoke for a long time. Mara translated sentence by sentence. She says the orchard is old, older than the village, older than the church. She says that the thing in the orchard is not evil the way people understand evil. It is hungry. It has always been hungry. It feeds on the substance of a person, the things that make a soul distinct from every other soul. Memories, attachments, the capacity for feeling. It cannot take these by force. It must be given access. A person must enter the orchard willingly, after dark, without protection. That is the invitation. And once the invitation is given, the feeding begins. Bunica paused. She looked at me. She spoke again, softer now. She says you were foolish, but you were not weak. A weak person would have given it something small and meaningless. You gave it something real. That means the door you opened is small. A small door. It can be closed. But it must be closed today, before tonight. It occurs because each night the door gets wider and what comes through it gets more. She reached out and took my hand, the one holding the wooden figure. She pressed my fingers closed around it and spoke directly to me in Romanian, slowly and clearly, as if the meaning could cross the language barrier through sheer will. Mara translated. She says, go to the old tree, press the token into the split in the bark, the one that faces east. Say these words. And she taught me a phrase. 4 words. I will not write them here because Bunica told me not to, and because that is the one instruction I have never broken. 4 words that I repeated until Bunica nodded. Then she released my hand and made the sign of the cross and said one final thing. She says, go now. Don't wait for noon. Go now, while the sun is rising. How's the sun rising is better than the sun high. A rising sun is a door opening. Use it. Donnie was waiting in the kitchen. He'd heard everything through the walls, or Mara had told him. Or he'd simply known the way people in small villages know things, through some osmosis of proximity and shared history. He looked at me without judgment. He looked at me the way a fellow climber looks at someone who has slipped and is hanging by a rope that may or may not hold. I'll walk with you to the edge, he said. I can't go in with you, but I'll be at the edge. Mara said, I'm coming too. No, I said. Don't tell me no. You don't get to tell me no right now. If something goes wrong, I don't want you near it. If something goes wrong, I am the person who should be near it. I am the reason you are here. This is my home. That is my orchard, and you are my... She stopped. She breathed. You are mine, and I'm coming. We walked out the back door into the morning light. The sun was just clearing the ridge to the east, a cold white disk that threw long shadows across the frozen ground. The orchard was ahead of us. In the dawn light, the trees had a golden tint, their bark catching the low sun, and for a moment they looked almost beautiful. Almost. Danny walked on my left. Mara walked on my right. Neither of them touched me. The distance felt deliberate, as if they were giving me space to do what I needed to do, or as if they were afraid that proximity might complicate whatever transaction was about to take place. We reached the edge of the orchard, the first trees. The threshold that I'd crossed 12 hours ago in the dark. The old tree is 60 meters in, Danny said. Straight ahead, slightly left. You'll know it. It's the biggest one. I know which one. Mara took my arm. She turned me to face her. In the morning light, her face was raw and open and terrified, and I understood for the first time the full weight of what I'd done. Not to myself, to her. I had taken her trust and her rules and her family's centuries of careful, disciplined coexistence with something incomprehensible, and I had treated it all as optional. I had broken the pact that kept her people safe because I was curious, because I wanted to know. "Come back to me," she said. "I will. Come back to me with the token gone and the door closed and yourself intact. All of yourself. Whatever's left. Bring it back." I kissed her. She tasted like coffee and fear. Then I turned and walked into the orchard. In daylight, it was different. The trees were just trees. The ground was just ground. The frozen apples were brown and soft and smelled of vinegar. The branches above me let in enough light that I could see clearly the trunks, the spaces between them, the path ahead. There was no breathing, no displacement, no voice. Just a winter morning in an old orchard. But there was something, a reluctance in the air, a thickness, like walking into a room where an argument has just ended. The emotional residue of something present, something watching, something aware of me but restrained, diminished by the daylight, pushed back. Not gone, just waiting. I found the old tree. It was unmistakable. The trunk was enormous, wider than a car, and the bark was so deeply furrowed that the crevices looked like wounds, dark channels in the wood that seemed to go impossibly deep. The branches spread out above me like a ceiling, thick enough to block the sun, and in their shade the air was colder, older, different. I found the split in the bark that faced east. It was a vertical crack, about a foot long at chest height. Inside it was dark. I held the wooden figure up and looked at it one last time. The small carved shape, almost a cross, almost a figure with outstretched arms. It was warm from my hand. It was warm from Bunika's hands before me, and from whoever had held it before her, and before them, back through time to whenever it had been made, by whoever had first understood that the orchard needed to be bargained with. I pressed the figure into the split. The bark resisted, then yielded, and the wood slid into the crack like a key into a lock, snug and precise as if the tree had been carved to receive it. I pressed it flush with the surface and held my palm against it and said the 4 words. The tree shuddered. I felt it through my hand, a vibration that ran down through the trunk and into the roots and through the frozen ground under my feet. The air in the orchard changed. The thickness thinned. The reluctance eased. And from deep inside the tree, from somewhere below, the bark and the wood and the heartwood and whatever was deeper than that, I heard a sound. Not a voice, not a breath, a closing. The sound a heavy book makes when it shuts. The sound a door makes in the last inch before the latch catches. A conclusive, final sound, and then something else. A whisper, not from the tree, from behind me, from the air itself. 4 syllables that I felt more than heard, a vibration in my molars, in the bones of my skull. The door closes. I waited. The sun was higher now, the light stronger, reaching through the branches and falling on the trunk of the old tree in bright patches. The wooden figure was invisible, swallowed by the bark, incorporated into the tree as if it had always been there. I turned around. The orchard was open. I could see the path back to the edge, the thinning trees, the open ground beyond, the back of the house, Danny and Mara were standing where I'd left them, two figures in the morning light, watching. I walked toward them. My legs felt normal. The air felt normal. The cold was just cold. I reached the edge and stepped out of the orchard, and Mara grabbed me and held me so tightly that I couldn't breathe. Over her shoulder, I saw Danny's face, and the relief on it was so naked and so total that I understood fully, for the first time, how close I had come. We went inside. Elena had made breakfast. She served it without speaking, but she touched my shoulder as she put the plate down, and the touch lasted a moment longer than it needed to, and I understood that she knew. Everyone in this house knew. Everyone in this village probably knew. The American who went into the orchard, the American who had to be pulled back. After breakfast, Bunica sent for me. I went to her room alone. She was in her chair, smaller than before, or perhaps I was seeing her more clearly. She looked at me and asked me something. A question, clearly, from the tone. I didn't need Mara to translate in. I don't know, I said. I don't know if it worked. She held out her hand. I took it. She closed her eyes and held my hand for a long time. Her dry, warm fingers wrapped around mine, and she was listening. Not with her ears, with something else, some sense that I don't have a name for. She opened her eyes. She spoke. One sentence, definitive and flat. I found Mara in the kitchen. What does Usha Inkissa mean? Mara looked at me. It means the door is closed. I sat down at the kitchen table and I put my head in my hands and I wept. Not from relief, from understanding. The door was closed. The transaction was over. It would not come for more. The 4 words had worked. The token had sealed the crack. The rising sun had opened a door that let me close another one. But the memory it had already taken was gone. That was the price. That was the permanent, irreversible cost of my curiosity, my arrogance, my stubborn refusal to follow 4 simple rules. My father's funeral, the rain, my mother's blue dress, the priest mispronouncing his name, the flower bouncing off the coffin, all gone. Not suppressed, not buried, not repressed. Gone. Taken. Consumed by something in an orchard that had been feeding on the substance of human lives for longer than anyone could remember. And his face. I couldn't get his face back. I'd lost that in the hours between entering the orchard and the dawn, the hours when the door was open and the thing was reaching through, taking freely, helping itself to, the parts of my history that were connected to what I'd given. The funeral led to the face. The face would have led to the voice, and the voice to the smell of his aftershave, and the aftershave to the feel of his hand on the back of my neck, and on and on and on until there was nothing left. A chain of associations, each one pulling the next into the dark. We stayed 2 more days. I spent them in a kind of functional haze, present and responsive, but internally altered, like a house with 1 room permanently locked. Mara watched me carefully. Danny treated me normally, which was its own kindness. Elena fed me. Vasily took me to chop wood again and said nothing about any of it, and I understood that this was how the village worked. Things happened, you endured them. You didn't discuss them beyond necessity because discussion didn't undo anything. On our last morning, I went to the village center alone. I was looking for the old man who'd grabbed my arm, the one who'd said the orchard had recognized me. I found him sitting outside the shop on a wooden bench, wrapped in a coat that was more patches than original fabric. He looked at me as I approached, and his face changed. He could see it too, the gap, the missing piece. He said something. I shook my head. I don't speak Romanian. He tried again, simpler, slower, as if volume and pace could bridge the language gap. Then he gave up on words and simply pointed at me, at the orchard visible over the rooftops, at me again. Then he made a gesture, closing his fist slowly until it was shut, and he looked at me with an expression that I interpreted as, "It's done." I nodded. He nodded. We sat there for a moment, two men who didn't share a language, looking at the rooftops and the smoke and the mountains. Then he patted my knee and stood up and shuffled away. On the drive back to Bucharest, Mara was quiet for the first hour. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "Bunica told me something this morning that she didn't tell you, about the memory you lost." I waited. "She said that when the orchard takes a memory, it doesn't destroy it. It keeps it. It uses it. That's how it grows. Every memory it's ever taken from anyone is in there, in the roots, in the wood. She said the oldest trees are made of centuries of stolen memories. That's why they grow in those shapes. Those aren't natural forms. They're the shapes of human grief and human joy and human love, twisted into wood." I looked out the window. The highway south was busy, cars and trucks, the ordinary infrastructure of a modern country. The mountains receded behind us. The bare trees gave way to suburbs and gas stations and billboards. She said, "Your father's funeral is in the old tree now. It'll be there forever. The rain, the dress, the flower, all of it, growing." I thought about that. I'm still thinking about it. A Thursday in September, preserved in the heartwood of a tree that has been drinking human memory for centuries. My mother's blue dress, my dropped flower, the priest who couldn't say my father's name correctly, all of it folded into the grain of ancient wood in a Romanian orchard that I will never visit again. We flew home from Bucharest on a Sunday. The apartment was the same. The dishes I'd left in the sink were still there. The ring on Mara's finger caught the light when she reached for her keys. We unpacked. We showered. We ordered food and sat on the couch and watched something forgettable on television. And Mara put her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and we breathed together in the warm, safe, ordinary space of our home. That night I dreamed about my father, not a memory, a dream. In it, he was standing in an orchard among old and twisted trees, and he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. He was trying to tell me something, but no sound came out. He held up his left hand, the hand that used to hold the coffee cup, and there was nothing in it. He opened his mouth, and the trees leaned in, and the branches bent toward him, like they were listening. And I woke up. I lay in the dark, and I tried to see his face from the dream, and I could not. It was already gone, not taken, just lost, the way dreams dissolve in the first seconds of waking, details running through your fingers like water. Mara shifted beside me. "You okay?" she murmured. "Yeah," I said. "Go back to sleep." I stared at the ceiling. I thought about rules, about the function of rules, the purpose of them, the way they are given to us not as restrictions, but as architecture, as the structure that keeps the building standing. I am a structural engineer. I understand. load-bearing walls. I understand that you cannot remove a support because it is inconvenient or because you are curious about what happens without it. You leave the wall alone. You trust the blueprint. You trust the people who built the building before you, who understood the stresses and the tolerances and the consequences of removal. I broke a rule. 1 rule out of 4. I walked into an orchard at night because I wanted to know what was there. And now I know. And the knowing cost me something I can never get back. Not because the knowledge itself was dangerous, but because knowledge has a price, and the price is set not by the learner, but by the thing that is learned. And some things charge more than you can afford. My father died when I was 12. His funeral was on a Thursday. It rained. These are facts. I know them the way I know the boiling point of water or the tensile strength of steel. But I cannot see them. I cannot feel them. The sensory, emotional, lived experience of that day has been removed from me with surgical precision. And in its place is a smooth wall, a closed door, a gap in the shape of a Thursday that will never be filled. Mara and I got married in March. Small ceremony, courthouse, dinner after with friends, and she wore a white dress, and I wore a suit that didn't fit right, and we said our vows in a room that smelled like floor polish and old paper. It was perfect. I remember every second of it. I hold every second of it tightly, consciously. The way you hold something precious when you know, from experience, how easily precious things can be taken away. I carry no token now. Bunika's wooden figure is in a tree in a Romanian orchard, sealed in bark, doing its work. I carry nothing but my own attention, my own vigilance, my own understanding that the world contains things that are patient and hungry, and not evil, not malicious, just operating by rules that are older than mine and non-negotiable. Sometimes late at night, when the apartment is quiet and Mara is sleeping, and the city outside is reduced to distant sirens and the hum of the refrigerator, I try to remember my father's face. I go to the place in my mind where it should be, and I find the wall, and I press my hands against it, and I wait. Nothing comes through. The door is closed on both sides. But sometimes just before sleep, here's in that thin space between waking and dreaming, I smell apples, cold, sweet, fermenting apples. And I know that on the other side of that wall, in the dark of the oldest tree, a Thursday in September is still happening. The rain is still falling. My mother is still wearing her blue dress. The flower is still bouncing off the coffin. And my father is there, in the memory that is no longer mine, forever preserved, forever out of reach, growing in the grain of ancient wood. I told Mara about the apple smell once. She held my hand and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "That's him. That's the closest he can get to you now, through the wood, through the roots, through the fruit. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if a memory can reach back toward the person it was taken from and can push through bark and soil and 1,000 miles of distance to deliver the faintest trace of itself. A smell, a suggestion, a reminder that it still exists. But I don't dismiss it. I've learned not to dismiss things. I've learned that the world is larger and stranger and more specific in its cruelties than I ever imagined, and that when someone who loves you gives you a rule, the rule is not a cage, it's a wall. and the wall is holding something back. Keep the wall standing. Follow the rules. Carry what you're given and don't put it down. I learned that in an orchard in Romania in December, in the dark, and the lesson cost me my father's face.